We need to move to our main topic, Rob, because we have a whole era to talk about.
We do.
In the ultimate Jodie Whittaker Cold Take. Now, we've explained the topic. We've explained why we're doing it. And what we agreed on, to sort of give some structure to this conversation and to make sure that we could do this within the time frame of a podcast episode, was we agreed we would each go and watch 6 episodes of the Jodie Whittaker Chris Chibnall era, and we would use those to sort of hang our thoughts on and kind of go back and reassess the era. Now, in our conversation since, I think it's turned out we've kind of taken that assignment in very different ways, which
is our want.
As is our want, and as our cool thing. And sometimes we very deliberately do that. We say, look, you go away and prep, I'll go away and prep, and we'll come back. And sometimes we're very in sync, and sometimes we've done it very, very differently.
Yes.
And I know, Rob, you sent me some notes saying that you had a very structured way that you made very careful decisions about which 6 episode you'd watch and why and how you do it. I kind of just put on the TV, scrolled to the Doctor Who menu and went, I think I'll watch that one. And,
right.
And so we've approached it in very different ways. And so, look, what we're going to do is I'm going to give some opening thoughts, and you may have some comments in reply, we'll see. You're going to give us some closing thoughts and see if you came to the same place I did. But in between, we're going to go through the list of Chibnall era stories, and if one of us has watched that episode and wants to talk about it, what do we do? Should we shout Chibbers?
Yeah, something like that.
We'll shout something like Chibbers, and we'll talk about it. So, look, to kick us off, I'm going to make an opening comment here, Rob. And my opening comment is, I think that this era of Doctor Who is going to age very well. I think that there is a lot of positivity in this era. There is a lot more fun in this era than I remember from when I was watching it, and the future of the show seemed to be at stake every time you watch a new episode because we're fans and that's how we feel. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. Am I about to talk about 6 classic episodes? I'm definitely not. But watching each episode on its own, just for fun, I found it was very, very easy. It was very, very enjoyable. I found Jodie Whittaker's Doctor in that more relaxed environment, and just tuning in and watching some Doctor Who worked much better than I remembered. So whilst I'm going to have some negatives to talk about, my opening gambit, my opening takeaway is this era, it may not be mentioned as the new series Hinchcliffe era or the Letts era, but I think it's going to be remembered quite fondly as people come back to it.
Another thing I'll throw in there as we begin is something we're not probably thinking about here is ratings. When you're watching these go out week after week and watching the ratings go down, 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 that comes into the conversation. But here, where it's just, I am putting on this story and watching it as a story, I wasn't thinking about ratings for any of these.
No, I hadn't even thought about it until then.
There you go.
There you go. So, look, let's get going. I'll start reading some episodes. Let's see how long we have until one of us has watched one.
Until we get a Chibbers.
The Woman Who Fell to Earth. The Ghost Monument. Chibbers!
Okay, off we go.
Look, so I did watch episode 2, The Ghost Monument, and this, I think, to me, did set up the very positive experience I had rewatching the Jodie era. As a standalone, it works far, far better than it does as the second of the series, where we're trying to work out what the series is about and how is Chibnall going to write and how is Jodie Whittaker going to work and how does this series all work and is it part of an arc and does this mean something and when you divorce yourself from all of that, you just go, I'm going to watch this story and I know that it means nothing. I know that it's going nowhere. In terms of sort of the big picture, I just thought this is a really great adventure. I think that the main conceit of these two people doing some sort of amazing race survivor type intergalactic game is a really cool idea, and it's one of those things of Doctor Who taking from pop culture and making it a Doctor Who thing. It looks stunning. It absolutely looks stunning. It does have that mention of the timeless child, which I must admit did make me sort of sit up in my seat and go, "Oh, that's right, that happened there. Shame nothing happened to that." And look, it's interesting. Even in this one, I can see what we know is going to become the Doctor and Graham show. I can see the seeds of that already happening, and Bradley Walsh is really, really good in it. The ending, the whole bit where the Doctor gets a bit depressed, it is a bit naff, but it looks good. I found her really easy to watch, and I thought this was a really good adventure. Classic? No, but just a fun, good-looking adventure.
Yeah, look, I think it is. Obviously, it's not one that I've rewatched here, otherwise I would have called Chibbers too. But I think what you're saying there is on point and plays into this idea of when you watch these things in isolation, they lift up a bit.
Well, they certainly can. We'll continue with the list.
Okay.
Rosa,
yeah.
Arachnids in the UK. The Saranga Conundrum.
Chibbers!
Excellent. You watched the Turanga Conundrum. What did you think?
I did. Well, look, first of all, I'll say, Dave, you mentioned earlier that I had a scientific method at play here. I'll just say that I selected my 6 stories from Jodie's first 2 series, as Flux felt a bit too recent to me.
Let me say I felt the same thing as well. With only 6 episodes to watch and so many more from the first 2 series, I thought, look, we've done Flux recently, so I didn't pick a Flux either. Spoilers, yeah.
But I picked very deliberately 2 stories I remember loving, 2 stories I remember hating, and 2 I was like a bit meh about. So I think whichever way you slice and dice it, I've got a pretty good selection going on here. It's not just stories what I loved or stories what I hated.
It's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum, absolutely. So we're going to kick off with the Saranga Conundrum for me.
I'm going to guess this was one you hated.
Yes, I chose it, Dave, because it's an episode I remember I really didn't like. Basically, I thought it was dumb. And now, we were some way into the episode. I say we, it was just me watching it. I don't know why I'm using the royal we. And I was thinking, nothing really bad has happened so far. But it didn't last for the whole episode. And by the end, I was confident it's not a great story. But what is interesting is I found it was actually a lot darker and a lot more emotional across the board than I remember, which are things that really appeal to me. But it still constantly undercuts itself with comedy, either the bloke who's pregnant or the way the Pating looks. I think if we ditched the Pating for something scarier, whether it's an eldritch horror from the dawn of time or some sort of sentient virus or something, the threat becomes something equally as destructive as a Pating, which is eating the spaceship. But it stops being a comedy moment that, oh, look, it's this little cute thing. Oh, it's eating everything. Because that just takes you out of the story. Something also needs to be done in the story with this storyline of the legendary general who, for some ungodly reason, isn't being seen to by the military's doctors. It's all a bit cack-handed. Chibnall obviously wanted a strong, legendary woman with an imminent demise to be on this little ship and to fulfill the story, but he doesn't really sell the reasoning around her being on this little ship in the first place well enough for it to hang together. Her storyline feels off target. But in the end, it's better than I remember, and I will happily say that. It's still not great. I'm not saying it's great. I wouldn't go showing this to a friend to get them into Doctor Who, but it's a real 6 out of 10 effort, and like I say, I was some way into the episode thinking nothing bad's happened. So I felt a lot more disposed to it than I did the first time around.
That's really interesting and kind of pleasing to hear. I think what you're saying about the Pating is correct. If you buy into that as a really wacky concept, the episode probably lands a bit better than if you go, well, if you don't buy into it. And I think there's also perhaps a sense in which it might outstay its welcome a bit, and maybe there's an issue like, oh, that's a cool idea, but does it sustain an episode, which I think was sort of what you were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, interesting.
Alrighty, shall we go back to the list?
We shall. Demons of the Punjab. Chibbers!
Oh, snap!
A first snap. Excellent.
Well, you can go first because I was just talking.
Look, I have identified this before as probably my favourite of the era, and I'll say up front, there was nothing in my rewatch that changed that view. I thought this was extremely well-made Doctor Who, and again, watching it just as its own thing, if anything, probably enhanced that. Patel, I thought, does a really good job of setting up the story, setting up the location. He sets up danger and threat and tension very quickly, and then you have what you think is the first explanation, but that's not true. And then you have the twist on that, then the other twist on that, then the real danger is actually, it was us all along sort of thing. And so there's a really effective way in which he keeps you interested. And there was one point I thought, wow, this is the exciting conclusion. Hang on, it's only been 20 minutes. Oh, there's more exciting conclusion to come, which really, really worked well. Again, it looks great. The location footage is really good. It puts us in history and it makes comment without making lecture, which I thought was really good. I mentioned before that even by the Ghost Monument, you could see the show becoming the Doctor and Graham show. And I think here you can see they're now writing Graham moments because they know that Bradley Walsh does the mentor, arm around the shoulder. Let me tell you about life, my perspective from my, everyday down-to-earth Graham perspective. He starts to get those speeches, and that was here. And he does it well, but I did see the script pieces working in that, which perhaps is a reflection of the fact that I now know that's becomes a bit of a trope in the show, so that was perhaps a distraction. But I was thoroughly engrossed in this, and I just think it's really good Doctor Who.
Yeah, look, I concur with all of that, and I will retort by talking through my notes. I chose this because it's an episode I remember really liking, so it's one of the love episodes for me. This one, when I rewatched it, is even better than I remembered. The first thing that really struck me about it was the music. The score in this is excellent, and I'd completely forgotten they even do the closing credits in that style of music.
Yes, me too, and that's so good, isn't it?
Yeah, it gets the drums and the wailing sort of voice and all of that stuff. It's wonderful. And thinking about this in relation to the Saranga Conundrum, which is literally the previous episode, both have heavy moments. This one is obviously heavier in general, and being a real-world situation has extra gravity on top of the heaviness in the script.
Yeah.
But I make the point that both are heavy, yet this one never undercuts itself with the silly humour. We don't go from brother threatening brother to an alien who looks silly, and we go, oh, look at that funny alien. We have an occasional one-liner here and there, but nothing comedic that undercuts things. The story knows it's heavy, and it knows what it wants to say and how to say it. The Saranga Conundrum wants to have heavy moments, but like some child who can't express their emotions properly, constantly goes and blows it every 5 minutes. And that's come across more than ever in this rewatch as I look at these two episodes back to back. So in the end, it's better than I remember. I already liked it to begin with. Even the aliens, which I've railed against for years, wondering, why are they there? Why don't we just have an historical? Even they felt right this time. So in my mind, this is pushing up. This is 9 out of 10 stuff. This is great stuff. Amazing stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting and really pleasing because I'm obviously a big fan as well. And something that I didn't have in my notes, but now that you're talking, I think is actually quite obvious, is that this is an era that works at its best when it's playing things straight.
Yeah.
And when it plays things straight, I think it lands very, very well. And perhaps some of its weaker ones are ones where either because they're trying to be a bit different or they're trying to be a bit quirky, or maybe they just don't want to look like they're taking themselves too seriously. They don't always play them as straight. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, like to go back to Saranga Conundrum, the scene at the end where the Doctor invokes this sort of prayer for the dead military commander, as she's intoning that, it's like, oh man, this is so... Look, I'm surprised Chibnall didn't have the pating run in and fart or something halfway through that. But that doesn't happen, of course. And all of that is really, really nice, but constantly in that script, undercut with comedy all the time.
Kablam. Chibbers.
Great.
Let me say, I watched this almost by accident because my modus operandi was to watch an episode, then go back to the menu and see what I felt like watching next. The problem was I enjoyed Demons of the Punjab so much that
you kept watching.
That it just scrolled into the next episode. I'm like, that's cool, I'll just keep watching. And before I knew it, Kablam had become my third pick. So there was no method to this whatsoever other than I was totally captured by the story, and the computer did what it was meant to do. It's like, well, if you're liking this, just keep watching us, please. Yeah. And I did. So that was good. Yeah, Kablam was really interesting, and I walked away from it, again, enjoying the story, but appreciating it in a slightly different way to what I did first. And partly because I think my memories of the hot take were really clouded in a lot of other hot takes and a lot of reactions since, where people drew various bits of message or various bits of allegory from it, and there was almost a sort of a mini culture war over the episode. But as I watched it back, and you can't help it, you've sort of got that fan debate in the back of your mind when you watch it. I thought that none of it on any side was kind of warranted, because watch this back and it's actually got a lot of real moral ambiguity in it. And there are a lot of occasions when a character will say something that in writing is a positive thing, but the way it's delivered, you can see that they think that, well, it's an ambiguous thing. So where characters give lines about, well, they're required to have 10% of humans as the workforce, you watch the reaction, you go, they're like, well, it's good that there are some humans with work, and it's good that we have some employment, but gee, it's only 10%. Well, why can't it be? There are lots of the debates in there that kind of happen in there. I think that Charlie's motivation is shown to be well meant, but what he does with that motivation is shown to be wicked. Charlie isn't just dealt with as a villain. He's given a chance to redeem himself and to survive, but he chooses not to for dramatic reasons. So I actually think there's a lot more ambiguity in this story, including the ending, than I think fans would get on a hot take. And I think this is therefore one that is really deserving of the rewatch. I think the setup is really good. It's a really interesting premise. Again, it's Doctor Who doing that thing that's very familiar and making it a Doctor Who concept. The robots are creepy. It throws a couple of punches, things like Kira's death. Charlie isn't a black and white villain. He's a nice guy that means well, but he's just gone to a really terrible place with it. It drags a little bit in the middle. I think it sort of goes around in circles for a bit, which on a rewatch you kind of notice. But I actually think there's a lot of depth to this that people don't appreciate on the first watch. And it's well made, and I think that this is going to also age quite well. I think it's going to age better than a lot of people expect it to.
That's really interesting to hear, because, you talk about that culture war stuff, and let's put cards on the table. People out there, especially on Twitter, have this pathological hatred of Amazon, and that's what they are equating it all to. And the plot that this guy is going to send out these explosive packages to customers, people are like, yeah, stick it to Amazon sort of thing. I would say to them, what if that was your dad getting a package from the Kablam service that he uses, and he gets blown up by this terrorist? You're still on the terrorist side? So there is so much ambiguity in this that I think people, it just flew over their heads. They were just so determined to say, I don't like Amazon, therefore the way this show sort of stuck up for Amazon-like companies is bad, is evil. And it's like, no, I think there's more to it. And I think I'd like to watch it again too. I didn't on this time around, obviously. But I would like to reappraise that ambiguity myself to really be across it. I think I've got the right of it on first watch. I certainly wasn't taking this ideological, I hate Amazon, therefore this story sucks angle, which so many people did. But I think even I could get something out of rewatching it.
Yeah, or even people who came to it from the other side of that sort of cultural debate, I think will realise that there's a lot more grey in it than there was. But the other thing is it uses the four members of the crew really well.
Right.
Which is a rare thing, and it's something I want to come back to at the end.
Okay.
The Witchfinders. It takes you away. The Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos. Chibbers! Oh, no! Another snap! Well, I led on our last snap, Rob, and I've just spoke for 2 episodes, so why don't you lead us off here?
Sure. Okay. This is one I chose, Dave, because it's an episode I remember hating. I remember being just totally disappointed with the story, and I thought to myself, has it got any better, 5 years later? 5 years, my God. So now, I kept waiting for the story to turn bad, and it never did. Is that shocking? Is that a shocking way to start this?
No, it's an interesting way to start it.
Okay. There were certainly things that annoyed me. The whole backstory feels very messy at first until it's explained that Tim Shaw arrived and the Ux worshipped him. But I'm still unclear as to what all the battles were that happened prior, what they were about, or why they had collected planets in jars, or how collecting planets in jars was fine, but if they had one more planet, that was a really bad idea, or how those planets in jars could be reconstituted by, like just adding water to powdered milk sort of thing at the end of the episode. So there are bits I'm still unclear about. There are things that annoyed me, but the story never went as bad as I thought it did. There are some great moments when Graham realises Tim Shaw's there, and he takes the Doctor aside and he says, if I see this prick, I'm going to kill him. And the Doctor is all sanctimonious and, is doing the whole, if you do that, you can't travel with me. Even though she's killed loads of people in her life. And if you do that, you're as bad as him. And Bradley Walsh is just quietly, nah, I'm not having that. It's a really well-written, really well-acted scene. Overall, though, I think the episode feels a bit like Chibnall's stressing about writing it and thinking, oh my God, it's the finale. Big idea, big idea, big idea, big idea. Does any of it work? Does it bollocks? But we need to put something out there. Here it is. So, in the end, this feels bizarre to say, but this is absolutely better than I remember. That doesn't mean I'm giving it a free pass, and there are still all those things I shake my head at. But as I just mentioned, I have to be honest, it's way better than in my memory. And it's really quite competent in a number of areas, and I can't believe I'm saying any of this, Dave.
Well, I watched it as well, and I picked it for a very similar reason. I didn't go in, as you did, with a very deliberate too good, too medium, too bad, but I did go in knowing I wanted to have a good mix and just not just watch all my favourites. Mm-hmm. And I did sort of think, look, I remember this is an episode that we didn't really like. It's certainly copped a lot of flack in social media over the last few years, and I thought I actually don't remember anything about it. So I'll check it in. And I had a similar experience to you in that I'm watching this, and again, divorced of it needing to do the heavy lifting and meet the expectations of being a season finale, which in the Moffat era and the RTD era were a very particular thing. There was a big series finale, and I think we were coming in with those expectations.
Whereas in classic Doctor Who, we never had such a thing.
No.
We just had a story and it would end.
No, that's exactly right. So I think when you divorce it again from those expectations and from where it sits in the show and just take it as an adventure, again, I was watching it and going, I'm not hating this. This is okay. Yep. Interestingly, though, I've also made notes about exactly the scene that you made, where I have talked about the really clunky writing that both actors are struggling to deliver. So what you said was well written and well acted, I've said is like a really clunky moment that slowed the story down and dragged it down a bit. So,
oh my God,
that's really. And folks, we did not plan this at all. We have both watched that. We've both picked that episode and taken that story in that way, really, really differently. Look, like you, I think that the conclusion is a little bit just sort of. Why is that happening? Oh, okay, fine, whatever. I'm not sure that the what's the name? The Zimshar villain. I'm not sure that Tim Shaw. Quite no, I can't say that's the guy from the Demtel ads.
And from the National Press Club as well.
He's from the National Press Club. He's on Canberra Radio now or something, I think.
That's right.
I don't think that he's got quite the gravitas that Chibnall thought he would have, and that I don't think he therefore quite carries the finale or really is frankly worthy of the rematch. So it doesn't quite have the intensity it was meant to. Is it an outright classic? No. Is it a stinker though? No, I don't think it is. As a piece of 50-minute television, as a bit of a fun adventure, I thought this was fine.
Yeah, that's my big takeaway. I'm not suddenly saying this is a forgotten classic that everyone should go and watch. But I am saying it's way better than I remember, and it's way better than I've talked it down for over the past 5 years. Yeah, likewise. So look, we are at the end of Chibnall's first season. I've watched 4, you've watched 3. Mm-hmm. And we know neither of us have any fluxes, so let's keep going. Okay.
Resolution. Spyfall Part 1. Spyfall Part 2. Orphan 55. Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror.
Chibbers!
Oh, I thought we needed one somewhere. Go on.
All right, Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. This is one of mine that was in the meh category. I remember thinking it was an interesting ep and had a great guest cast, but something had stopped it from being great. That was my memory of it. So now, I still see this as an interesting one, Dave. That the sets, the costumes, the locations look great. The guy playing Tesla is fabulous, as is the Edison character. But then we get to the Skithra, who seem like a poor man's Rachnos. And zapping their ship with Tesla's tower seems like such low-hanging fruit. I saw a much more interesting direction this story could have gone with the Orb of Thassa. They get the Orb of Thassa and they say this comes from the ancients. They were used to spread knowledge. But oh no, the orb's been reprogrammed by the Skithra, and it isn't spreading knowledge anymore and has nothing to do with the ancients, etc., etc. And I'm like, oh my god, that was the story, guys. Have Edison and Tesla competing over getting information from the orb from these ancients. And you're trying to stop them both. You're trying to keep them apart. You're trying to keep one from grabbing the orb from the other. Or is that too cerebral and the audience wants, oh, here are some ugly aliens and we need to zap their spaceship? So in the end, it falls a little more on the good side than the mess side of the first time I watched it, but only a little bit. So not a huge change for me. It started all right in my memory, and it's still all right. It's a 7 out of 10 effort. Not much variation in this one, and I as I say, I saw a better way this story could have gone when I rewatched it. Yeah,
interesting. I don't remember a lot about this. I do remember I was a little bit more down on it than you were on the hot take, but yeah, maybe that's another one that I need to rewatch. Right, we've now watched 4 episodes. Back to the list.
Yes.
Fugitive of the Jadoon, Chibbers.
Great.
This is one that I did flag, I think, in our last monthly episode when we discussed the topic, that I was absolutely always going to go back and watch. The reason is twofold. One, because I do have very fond memories of it. 2, because of the role that it sort of has taken on in Doctor Who mythology. And 3, because I know that it's an episode where, when I watched it the first time, a lot of my enjoyment was from the, oh my god, wow, what's happening? And does it hold up when you know what's going to happen?
Yeah, you've mentioned this many times on the show, even before we started planning this episode, that it was something you were interested in revisiting one day.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I have, and I've got to say it does hold up very, very well. Now, again, if I was planning this list of 6 to watch, I don't know that I would have watched both Punjab and Jadoon, because they are both Vinny Patel episodes, and maybe that's not,
of course.
That's a bit unfair. But as I said, my gut said this is where to go, so that's what happened. And again, you see, watching them both sort of within a week of each other, Patel has this really good way of every 5 or 6 minutes just finding another little action beat or another little plot beat that helps to ramp up the tension. And I think that's what works very well in his writing, and I think it works very well here. Because as I'm watching this, again, Ruth is an even more engaging character now than she was the first time, because the first time you're watching it, you're going, okay, what's happening? Who's the fugitive? What's going on? And because you know that she's going to turn out to be the fugitive, you're just like, hey, actually, she's really engaging. And I kind of feel a bit sorry for her when the tourist is like, oh, maybe I'll come back. And she's like, no, you're not going to. And I maybe felt a little bit guilty because I've done that before. Like, you know, oh, maybe I'll come back. Like, I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
So, it sort of felt really human. The Jadoon are really good, and they're the right sort of excitement machine for that. The way that the revelation that she's got a police box is directed is really strong, and so it still holds up. So that first 2/3 I thought was incredibly exciting and incredibly good, and I do think that Patel has enough little beats in there to keep the tension going. Did the back third hold up quite as well? No.
Ooh.
I think that when you do take away the revelations from there, all you've got is about 10 to 15 minutes of 3 or 4 people talking in a room, and it does actually just feel like 2 or 3 people talking in a room. When you know that the whole, how did this work? What's this? Did you come before me? Did I come before you? It's kind of going to go nowhere. Like they play with it a little bit, and you've got that whole sort of Irish thing and the timeless child, but it's never really quite resolved. It's never made quite clear, even in Flux, sort of how Ruth as the Doctor works. When you sort of know that's sort of coming, you're like, well, I don't care about any of that because I know that it's not going to be anything. It is just sort of people talking in a room, and it's very good acting, and they are very good actors, but I thought that the back third did fall down a little bit. So I still think it's a great episode, and that first 2/3 is excellent. The back part, though, was a little bit weaker, but where it's good, it's really, really good. And again, John Barrowman, the first 2/3 of John Barrowman, where he's having fun, he's flirting with Graham and everything, and you go, yeah, this is fun. You know, this is what Captain Jackie's meant to be. And you know, look, we know John Barrowman's got his faults. We go, look, it's kind of working here. Then when he starts doing all his, you must not give the lone sideman what he wants, or it's the end of the world, and you sort of go, well, she did, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
so again, the back third there falls down again as well. So a mixed bag there. I still think it's a great episode. The first 2/3 held up. The back part didn't.
Did you like it better or worse than when you first saw it?
On balance, probably a little bit worse. But, you know,
Really?
we're talking about going from like a 9 to an 8. But it did drift a little bit because of that sort of back part of it.
Well, this was never an episode that really wowed me. It had the big wow moment, but the episode overall never wowed me, so maybe this is one I should scratch a note down and go and rewatch just to see how I feel about it too, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that would be very interesting.
Okay.
Praxius. Chibbers.
Okay.
This was my number 6, and this was one that I really agonised over. Those people who have been following me on Twitter in the last week will have seen that I did sort of lock in those first couple that I wanted to watch, and then there were a couple more I did watch, and then I sort of got down to that last 6th slot, and I was jumping around, sort of wanting to watch something that I had very ambiguous views on, and I was in the end tossing up between this, Can You Hear Me, and Orphan 55, and I just went with Praxius for gut instinct, frankly, and again, I didn't mean to watch 2 Pete McTighe episodes. It's just where my gut took me. Mm-hmm. I didn't remember a lot about Praxius. And as I'm watching it, I thought, this is fantastic. This is an amazing, energetic start to the episode. It, again, looks spectacular. That, I think, is a bit of a theme that we've both been talking about with this era. And it moves from place to place really, really well. That adventure is really well set up. It doesn't stop for the first probably 30 minutes. Unfortunately, it then really does stop, and there is a huge amount of people in a room standing around explaining the plot. I was reminded at this stage that my big criticism of it when I watched it for the hot take was, I don't know what's going on. And unfortunately, when I watched it again cold, I also got thin and thought, I have no idea what just happened. So in that respect, it's probably held about level. The first half an hour, fantastic. The last 20 minutes, bemusing. So this is probably the one that hasn't gone up or down. It's stayed where I had it the first time.
Right. I remember not liking this at the time, so this would have been not even maybe even more in my hate category, but I already had done 2 episodes I hate, so it didn't end up in my list. Obviously, I've not snapped with you here. I have very vague memories of it involving ocean rubbish or plastics or something like that. Am I on? I'm on track. Okay, so I remember that much about it, but I don't remember a whole lot about it except I didn't like it.
Yeah, and Doctor Who can do lecture. You think about John Pertwee giving one of his mankind can destroy the world and he probably will speeches, and John Pertwee can kind of do that because it's John Pertwee and he does moral outrage really well. Or at least I think he does. I know that some people find he doesn't. That's okay. There is a lot of moral outrage in this about the plastic and about pollution, all the rest of it. And I think that whereas in a lot of other episodes, I've really enjoyed Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor because of that fun, very adventurous, very easy to watch aspect. In the back part of this, she does start to become a lot more morally outraged and, hey kids, this is the lesson of the episode. And I don't think she succeeds in doing that quite as well.
Right. Interesting.
So I've done 6 now. Rob, you've still got 2 to go.
2 of mine are out there still, Dave, yes.
Excellent. Well, I'll keep reading. Can You Hear Me?
Almost, but no.
The Haunting of Villa Diodati.
Chibbers!
I thought so. Is this another you all really liked?
This is a love one, yes.
Let's find out if you still love it.
Yeah, I chose it because I've believed for the longest time that this is my favourite episode of the Whittaker era. Yeah. And now, I think it's still great. But it's been so long between viewings, I actually surprised myself at first with how long this episode goes on with just hauntings and the house changing configuration and Shelley being missing. This is a whole storyline that goes on forever before Ashad the Cyberman turns up, which was actually my main memory of the story. Oh, that's the one with Ashad. He turns up and does all this stuff. And of course, when Ashad turns up, he's not there for laughs. He breaks necks. In a moment we think he's sharing some vulnerability, he suddenly starts talking about slashing his children's throats. I mean, this is how you do a Cyberman. Obviously, he's got human qualities, which are related to what I'm just talking about here, like some of this dialogue he's delivering about, slash their throats, etc. But in general, I think you have to make Cybermen fearsome. You don't want to mess with a Cyberman. They're not tin soldiers to be mown down in their dozens. And I think just one Cyberman comes across so well in this story. Also, unrelated, the Doctor showing Shelley his death to make the Cyberium think that he was dying and it needed to jump out of his body. That's dark as hell, and it's so inspired. Oh my God, I love that. So, in the end, aside from making Byron act quite stupidly in one scene, where he leaps behind a woman and wants the woman to shield him, I just don't buy Byron doing that. It's out of sync with how he acts elsewhere in the same episode, let alone what we know of him in real life. Like, he was a really adventurous kind of do-anything kind of guy. I think this episode is really great stuff. It was good then, it's good now. Along with that earlier episode I was mentioning that didn't have a lot of change, this has probably the least change for me as well. It's a 9 out of 10 still. It's just great. It has so much to it. It's fun. It's in a period house, which, as I always say, the BBC does so well. I would have loved to have seen more Jodie episodes like this.
That's really interesting, really good. Did you find your knowledge of what's to come with Ashad played into your viewing this time at all, or you just took him as he was in the episode?
Well, again, it did from the point of view that I was wondering, when does this guy turn up? I'm watching this whole episode where they're getting around the house, they go upstairs and then they're back in the same room, the house changes configuration. Where is Shelley? We don't know. Graham keeps seeing this maid and a little girl and they bring him some snacks, and then we learn at the end that they had nothing to do with the story, so were they really ghosts? All of that storyline is happening. And the TARDIS team is split up quite nicely. All of that happens for ages before Ashad turns up. Well, what feels like ages. Yeah, so it did play into my memory a bit, because I was thinking, when's this bucker showing up? Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, look, we've got one more. Ascension of the Cybermen. The Timeless Children. Revolution of the Daleks.
Chibbers!
Great.
So here we are. We're in a special now, not an actual series episode. And Revolution of the Daleks is one of my meh episodes. This is one I couldn't quite put my finger on at the time. I knew it wasn't a stinker by any stretch, but I knew I didn't really rate it like I rate some episodes. So now, I'm going to say this one surprised me quite a bit. I liked nearly all of it. A few moments took me out, like when Yaz and Jack have a lengthy D&M about life with the Doctor. Jack's saying to her, you've just got to grab the opportunity while it's there, and all this. And it's really sweet and it's really touching, and they've bonded amazingly. It's really well done. And then literally in the next scene, Yaz smashes him with a one-liner about how needy he is. And you see why it's there. You can picture a certain kind of fan at home just chortling away, like, oh, she said he's needy, and oh, isn't he needy? But it just makes no sense. There's no way you would really bond with someone almost to the point of tears and then suddenly in the next minute just burn them with a one-liner, So that just felt out of place. And later there's a scene where Ryan, and I think I talked about this on our hot take, where Ryan gives life advice to the Doctor. Like, sure, this teenager who's always screwing things up is now like Gandhi all of a sudden and is giving this advice. Or he's like the Dalai Lama or something, He's giving this advice to someone who's lived thousands of years and more lifetimes than he ever will. Just stupid. But outside of that, even that opening bit where the Doctor hasn't bothered to break out of space jail for 20 years, that didn't bother me at all. And I found myself really enjoying the episode. So in the end, Dave, We've got Daleks who are properly deadly and merciless. The Chibnall death count is off the charts in this one. Daleks mow down what seems like dozens of people in every other scene. And even the bi-fam, and I hate the term fam, but even the bi-fam moment at the end when they all put their heads together and it's shot from below. It's like that scene in The Doors where the Doors have just taken drugs and they've got their heads together and they're having a moment. It reminds me of that. It's just great. So this was a real surprise packet. I really enjoyed it. I forget his name now, but the American character Chris Noth plays, who they've had back twice now in the series. I enjoyed all his one-liners and stuff. I thought this was really great, and it's definitely not a meh episode for me anymore.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So, look, between us, we've watched 10 episodes.
Yes.
Look, had we sort of had 8, I would have watched one from Flux, and I probably would have watched something like Sea Devils. But again, look, we're approaching well past the hour mark of the podcast, and that would have added a bit too much, which is a shame, but we have to be strict about these things.
Yeah.
Something that I've noticed, I think in your description of that last episode there, the 10th we've talked about, is that the first time either of us have mentioned Yaz or Ryan?
Oh, yes. We've been talking about Graham a fair bit.
We've been talking about Graham. We've been talking about the Doctor, but neither of us brought them up. And that very nicely moves into a point that I wanted to make. Having watched them all, I thought that Jodie Whittaker was better than I remember, and particularly when she's having fun. She's a really engaging Doctor, and I think she's really good, and I think will, again, age well. Graham, we said at the time, was excellent. Bradley Walsh is very, very good. They quickly work out how to write him really, really well and write to his strengths. So both of them stood up really well. Mm-hmm. I didn't notice Yaz or Ryan much at all in any of these. Yaz occasionally gets a couple of cool moments. Ryan occasionally got a couple of nice lines. I think in Praxis he had a couple of really good lines. They were used fairly well in Kablam.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly they were window dressing for me. They were just there. They didn't stand out. And I was not surprised about Yaz, because I think we've talked at length about Yaz being underused. Yes. I was surprised at just how little I got out of Ryan. Not that I disliked him, but just he didn't do a lot.
Yeah, I'd concur with that, actually. Now that you've raised that. I mean, again, Yaz, not a surprise, but Ryan, yeah, not as present, at least in these episodes, as we thought.
Yeah, look, maybe we've done him and indeed her a bit of a disservice by the ones we've picked, and that's part of picking these, in a semi-random kind of way. But look, Rob, I opened with some thoughts. It's your turn to give us some overarching views of the Whittaker-Chibnall era.
In every case, I think my rewatchers saw my opinion go up of the stories I'd picked. Sometimes just a little, sometimes a lot. Sometimes stuff that really bothered me at the time wasn't even a blip on the radar anymore. Other times stuff would happen and I'd be like, yeah, I remember hating that bit. I still hate it now. But overall, the episodes were better. Without watching them weekly, without being invested that this is Doctor Who right now, with my foot now off the accelerator a little, if I can put it that way, I enjoyed all of them more. Well, Rob, you might say, why not stop doing hot takes and do your reviews a week after the ep goes out or something like that? And no, this comes back to what I was talking about earlier. I think it's really important to do a hot take while you're still in the zone with the episode. You want to know what your thoughts were straight away. So I don't think that's the answer. I do think it's interesting, though, to go back after a period of time like we've done here. And in terms of the Whittaker era overall, I too, Dave, and this is not a setup, think it's going to grow in popularity. Part of me can't believe I'm saying that because I had some negative times with the era, but I think it's true. I know I've seen it in past eras, especially when a new crop of fans come along. Look at the way newer fans came to Colin and were like, oh, wow, his costume's wild, and oh, the way he's a prick to people, that's really awesome. And he was so hard done by, by the BBC. This is our man. And anyone who was there at the time for the Baker era is like, what the actual F? What are these people on about? I think that's going to happen more with Whittaker's episodes too. I think it's got its own fan base now, but I think in the future, even in the Disney era, in the next year or two, as new people come along and go, oh, what's this female doctor all about? They're going to watch these stories and think, this is bloody great. And they're not going to have any of the same thoughts we had about these stories. And I think that's fair, because there's a solid base of genuinely good stories here. Not just the ones I reviewed, not just the ones you reviewed either, as I deliberately chose some from the dodgier side of the tracks. But as more people come to them and don't have that pressure of it being the current era, and maybe they hear that the past generation of fans really didn't like this era and the ratings plummeted and such, they're going to be like, aha, here's something I can love. Here's something I can champion. And hey, after watching a few episodes, I don't even have to lie. I actually like this stuff. It's good. That's what I imagine people will be doing in the future. And I think it's perfectly justified by the episodes I've rewatched here, and I dare say others in these 3 series.
Yeah, look, whilst every moment of every episode I watched didn't necessarily go up, my overall enjoyment of the era certainly did. And I don't think it's just a coming back to them in the Cold Take, and I don't think it's just the passing of time, because I think that as much as I enjoy the Capaldi era, it's not going to age quite as well, because it is a very particular thing with a very particular taste. And the Matt Smith era, which is less to my liking, again, is a very particular thing with a very particular taste. And some people love it and some people don't. And I think both those eras will have their fans and have their detractors, because they will work or they won't. And those doctors will work for some and not work for others. But I do think that with the Whittaker era, and indeed with Jodie Whittaker's doctor herself, there is a level of fun and accessibility and simplicity to this era that maybe we didn't appreciate or understand when we watched it the first time, but I think is going to really lend it some favourability in the years to come. That's really sort of all I've got, Rob. You haven't spoken too much, though, about Whittaker's doctor herself. Any final thoughts on her from you?
You mentioned, Dave, liking her more, and I would concur that I actually liked her more in this rewatch too. You brought up when she's being fun. I actually enjoyed her when she was being a bit morose and sad, like when she did that prayer in the Saranga Conundrum, or like when they're walking along in Demons of the Punjab, knowing that rifle shot is about to go out, and it goes out, and the look on her face. I liked some of the sadder moments that she did. And I do remember that episode where she stepped out onto a ruined Gallifrey that's in an episode that neither of us watched. And she's like, and just the way her face fell there. So I've actually enjoyed some of her more dramatic moments, I've got to say.
Interesting. Okay, well, look, We've both come at it from different perspectives, and we've both approached this assignment in very different ways, but walked out with positive takes, with positive vibes, and that's that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, and look, I think your comparison to Smith and Capaldi, without ongoing arcs, I mean, we do have this, what's the timeless child, what's all that going to be about stuff going on, but outside of that, there's no what's the hybrid, what's Lady Me, who is the impossible girl, all of that layered stuff, which if you went back and just watched an individual episode, and I think this is what you're probably getting at from the Capaldi era or Smith, you'd be like, whoa, what was this all about again? These are more standalone stories on the whole.
And I think that serves it well.
Absolutely.
So look, that's what we thought about the Jodie Whittaker, Chris Chibnall era. Chibbers, just one last time.
Chibbers! Say his name 3 times, Dave, he'll come.
Oh, I won't do that then. So, as always, look, please let us know what you thought of our cold takes. If you have any opinions of your own, if you've gone back and watched some of these episodes off the back of the episode, would love to hear from you. One person, when they heard our plan for this episode, did send us a tweet, our good friend Mike Solko. What did he have to say, Rob?
Oh, you want me to read it, Dave? Okay.
Well, I haven't got it in front of me. I'm sitting in a hotel room.
Sure. Mike Solko says, despite taking some admirable and overdue steps forward, this was the most vanilla era of Who since the Davo era.
I had to make you read that out.
And on Twitter, he then posted a GIF of an explosion. And Mike, just for you, here's an explosion.